Imagined two giants standing on opposite sides of a river. One is the United States, the world's largest economy for decades, a global superpower with military bases spread across the globe, and the self-proclaimed leader of the free world. On the other side stands China, civilization thousands of years old, with the largest population on Earth, rapidly growing wealth, and ambitions that stretch far beyond its borders. These two powers trade with each other, compete with each other, sometimes cooperate, and sometimes clash. But here's the big question. Are the United States and China friends or rivals? Before we dive in, welcome to our channel. Here, we break down history, politics, and world events in a simple and engaging way so you can better understand how our world really works. If that's something you're curious about, consider subscribing and joining us on this journey. Now, back to the US and China. Their relationship is one of the most important in the 21st century because it affects not just them, but the entire world. To really understand whether they're friends, rivals, or both, we need to take a step back and look at how their story began, how it's evolving, and where it might be going. Let's start with history. For much of the 20th century, the United States and China didn't have much of a relationship at all. After the Chinese Communist Revolution in 1949, the US refused to recognize the People's Republic of China. Instead, Washington supported Taiwan as the true government of China. For decades, the two countries were basically strangers, sometimes even enemies during the Cold War. Things began to change in the 1970s. In 1972, US President Richard Nixon made a historic visit to Beijing and met with Chairman Mao Zedong. This moment opened the door to relations between the two countries. Over the next decades, China began to reform its economy under Deng Xiaoping, opening up to trade and foreign investment. The United States saw an opportunity, cheap manufacturing, massive markets, and a potential new partner in the global economy. By the 1990s and early 2000s, US-China trade exploded. American companies moved factories to China, where labor was cheaper. Suddenly, Made in China labels appeared everywhere, from toys to electronics to clothing. Walmart, Apple, Nike, name it, and chances are it had ties to Chinese manufacturing. For Americans, this meant cheaper products. For China, it meant jobs, growth, and a rising middle class. In 2001, China joined the World Trade Organization, officially cementing itself into the global trading system. From then on, China's economy skyrocketed. Hundreds of millions of people were lifted out of poverty. Cities like Shanghai and Shenzhen transformed into futuristic megacities almost overnight. China went from being an emerging economy to the world's second largest, challenging the dominance of the United States. But here's the catch. As trade grew, so did tensions. Many American workers lost jobs in manufacturing because companies moved production overseas. Economists called it the China shock. Millions of US jobs, especially in the Midwest. At the same time, American politicians accused China of manipulating its currency, stealing intellectual property, and engaging in unfair trade practices. This tension boiled over into what became known as the US-China trade war. Under President Donald Trump, the US imposed tariffs, basically taxes on hundreds of billions of dollars of Chinese goods. China responded with tariffs of its own. For ordinary Americans, this meant higher prices on products like electronics and furniture. For China, it meant slower exports. The trade war didn't solve everything, but it showed that the honeymoon period was over. The US and China were no longer just trading partners, they were competitors. But trade isn't the only battlefield. Let's talk about technology. If the 20th century was defined by oil and industry, the 21st century is defined by technology. Artificial intelligence, 5G networks, semiconductors, quantum computing. And in this race, the US and China are American companies like Google, Microsoft, and Apple are global tech leaders. But China has its own giants: Huawei, Tencent, Alibaba, and ByteDance, parent company of TikTok. Chinese companies are innovating fast, often backed by massive government support. Take 5G, the next generation of wireless technology. Huawei, a Chinese company, became a world leader in 5G infrastructure. The US saw this as a threat, warning allies that Huawei could be used for Chinese spying. Many countries banned or limited Huawei's role in their networks under American pressure. Or look at artificial intelligence. Both the US and China are investing billions in AI research. China has rolled out facial recognition systems across its cities, while American companies lead in advanced AI models. Whoever dominates AI could have the upper hand in military, economic, and cultural power. Then there are semiconductors, teeny chips that power everything from smartphones to fighter jets. The US is still ahead in semiconductor design, but much of the manufacturing happens in Asia, especially Taiwan. China wants to reduce its dependence on foreign chips, while the US wants to restrict China's access to advanced technology. This tech rivalry is intense, because it's not just about money, it's about national security. So we have trade tensions, and we have tech rivalry. That sounds like rivals, right? But here's the twist. The US and China are also deeply connected. They're not just rivals, they're partners in many ways. Think about climate change. The two countries are the world's biggest polluters, but also the biggest investors in green technology. When they work together, global climate agreements move forward. When they don't, the fight against climate change stalls. Or think about global health. During the COVID-19 pandemic, the US and China clashed over blame and vaccine diplomacy. But scientists from both countries also shared data, research, and sometimes even resources. Even in business, cooperation continues. Despite tensions, Apple still relies heavily on Chinese factories. American farmers still export soybeans to China. Chinese students still attend US universities in large numbers. In many ways, the economies are tied together like Siamese. Twins neither can easily separate without hurting itself. This brings us to the core of the issue. The US and China are locked in a relationship of both rivalry and partnership. Economically, they depend on each other. Strategically, they compete with each other. Some call it a new Cold War, a battle for global influence between Washington and Beijing. But unlike the old Cold War with the Soviet Union, the US and China are economically intertwined. During the Cold War, the US barely traded with the USSR. With China, trade is measured in the hundreds of billions every year. That makes the rivalry more complicated. Geopolitically, the US worries about China's growing influence in Asia and beyond. The South China Sea is a flashpoint, where China builds islands and claims territory, while the US sends naval ships to challenge those claims. Taiwan is another. The US has pledged to help Taiwan defend itself, while China insists Taiwan is part of its territory. Any conflict over Taiwan could draw the two superpowers into direct confrontation. At the same time, China is pushing forward with the Belt and Road Initiative, a massive project to build infrastructure and trade routes across Asia, Africa, and Europe. Critics say it's a way for China to expand influence. Supporters say it's development. Either way, it shows China's ambitions to play a bigger role on the global stage. Meanwhile, the US continues to maintain alliances with countries like Japan, South Korea, and Australia, while also working with NATO and other partners. These alliances are part of its strategy to counterbalance China's rise. So, are the US and China friends or rivals? The truth is they're both. They cooperate where they must, compete where they can, and clash when they feel threatened. The relationship is too big, too complex, and too important to fit neatly into one category. As we look to the future, one thing is clear. The US-China relationship will shape the 21st century. Whether it leans more toward rivalry or cooperation will affect everything from the global economy to climate change, technology, and even the possibility of peace or conflict. And here's where you come in. That's the story of US and China. Sometimes friends, sometimes rivals, always intertwined. But what do you think? Is the US-China relationship headed toward more cooperation, more rivalry, or a mix of both? Drop your thoughts in the comments, we'd love to hear your take. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss our next video. Together, we'll keep exploring the stories that shape our world.